The electron travels around the nucleus in a circular manner. It is a particle with a determined mass, shape, and velocity of displacement. When excited by external energy, it climbs into an attached energy orbit further away from the nucleus. When it abruptly descends to its original orbit, its velocity and trajectory changes and the extra attached energy is emitted into space, rapidly moving away as light energy. The distance traveled between the upper orbit and the resting orbit produces a duration and trajectory of that energy called a photon. Therefore, the generation of the photon has a time and distance determined by the electron's displacement between the two orbital states. So every time the electron goes up and down, it has a frequency in time and displacement in space that the photon emitted on its descent will exactly copy and propagate in space with that shape, length, and frequency. It has a start and an end moment. It is a unit that travels together or alone through space-time. That is, it is not a continuum of self-regeneration, alternating states like an electromagnetic wave is supposed to. It does not go from a positive crest to a valley. It does not have a zero crossing like a sinusoidal wave, nor does it change polarity by the direction of circulation. The photon has a shape determined by the development of the curved path of the electron between the two levels. We call this the shape of the photon. Formerly wrongly called waveform, So this length of the trajectory or development we can call the length of the photon, formerly wrongly called wavelength. Each element has, depending on the excitation, the characteristic of generating photons every time, i.e. in different frequencies and duration. In Young's double-slit experiment, the concept that dark interference bands on the screen are the result of phase cancellation of peaks and valleys arriving at the same time on the screen, or intensity bands by peak phase, waves, or valleys arriving at the same time on the screen is false. The 220-year-old experiment has another explanation. By sending a beam of monochrome light through the double slit, the flux, i.e. the flow of photons, collides with the middle wall, producing a split of the photons. Some taking the side we'll call right and others the left side. Since we said that its development or trajectory is curvilinear, by copying the path between the two orbits of the electrons that generate it, similar to those parentheses, with two photons with a very similar frequency are mixed, or commonly called in radio frequency, there is a Hertziano effect, where we have the two original frequencies plus the resulting from the sum and subtraction of those two mixed frequencies. The double slit in this case acts as a heterodyno mixer that gives intermediate frequencies. On the screen you see the millions of photons in an arrangement of bands of light and darkness resulting from the sum and subtraction of those. If we levitate the central wall of the double slit and vary the distance between the walls and the angle, we can vary the mixing of photons, and thus we can change the result of the pattern on the screen. By applying an electronic sound wave to a levitation control of that central wall, we can modulate the mixer and get on the screen bands modulated by sound waves. Just as water, that is a molecule, not a wave, can be modulated by disturbances such as sound waves. We can define that the so-called interference pattern is the result of photon intermodulation. When recording images with special cameras, we can notice that the photons have the have the property of joining easily with other nearby photons, forming long chains, something similar to processionary caterpillars. That has confused many into believing that it is a wave. When in an old experiments they fired individual photons into the double slit, they could see that the misnamed interference pattern did not form, because you can't mix one photon alone. It's like adding 10 or 1 and 0, but in reality when you do the experiment of sending a flux or a flow of millions of photons allows the possibility of them meeting and mixing on the back side of the central wall and being projected onto the screen as an intermodulation spectrum.